Hi students, I wanted to talk to you today about the annotated bibliography for this is the project before your final paper this video is for both of my students at Solano and for Napa Valley College. So I do want to clarify at Solano you have the LR10. In Napa, you folks do not. So if you are taking LR10, it is also the final project for LR10. All right, so just you know where you are, so this will make sense, or depending on which school you're at, right? Okay, so the annotated bibliography, just to give you an overview, it is a list of your sources for the final research paper done MLA style, annotated. I'm going to explain that in a minute. All right, so your final research paper, to be clear about that, your final research paper is going to be your idea about one of the stories that we have read. So it could be the Kate Chopin stories, Desiree's Baby, The Story of an Hour, it could be The Yellow Wallpaper, it could be Bartleby the Scrivener, it could be the Metamorphosis, it could be one of the Edgar Allan Poe stories, the Cask of Amontillado, The Fall of the House of Usher. It could be the Alice Walker story, Everyday Use, right? You get to choose your story that you are going to have an idea about for your final paper, okay? Your annotated bibliography is a list of your sources that you are going to use to help you to write a good paper, okay? So first you need to have an idea about your paper, right? So I'm going to just give you some ideas that students have worked on in the past, just real quick, right? And hopefully this doesn't mean you have to work on that exact idea, but you could, and it would also give you some brainstorming ideas. So let's say Story of an Hour, you wanted to work on something regarding feminism, like women's rights in the 1800s, heart conditions, what heart conditions were like for women in the 1800s, and did that restrict them from pursuing their dreams or things like that, or traditional marriage in the 1800s, that kind of thing, right? There's a lot more than that you could talk about. I've had students even, I remember having a student write on the stages of grief, and having an idea about that, how that connected with her reaction, something like that. Desiree's Baby, you might have ideas on racism, how the racism that is shown in the story, how that had a tragic effect on either Desiree, Armand, both of them. That one, something like that could be your idea. I once had a student write his paper for this story on that he argued that very effectively that Armand, it's easy to look at Armand as a villain, but that he argued that Armand was a victim of his society at the time, and very effectively, of this very structured racist society at the time, and he argued that very effectively. So you could have an idea about one of the characters in any of the story and just center your idea about that character. That would be a great way to do it, right? You could Yellow Wallpaper, I've had a lot of students work on that it was tragic to have symptoms of postpartum depression without having the medical understanding that they did not have at that time, medical understanding of postpartum depression. There was no term postpartum depression at that time. They really didn't have an understanding of it. So, but people had the same issues that they're having now. So having to go through having those symptoms, but with no medication, no counseling, no, in fact, everything being taken away from you and you're in a room, right? So the rest cure, it was an actual cure, right? That's another thing. I've had students research the rest cure and have an idea about that, the rest cure's tragic effect on women's mental health in the 19th century, something like that, right? Again, you could do a character focus. You could do a character focus similar to what I just said about Armand. You could do a character focus on the husband in the Yellow Wallpaper, and argue that that again, like he was as much tragically affected by this lack of having correct medical attention for his wife's issue, and look at what he went through, or the child, and of course for her, I mean, like, for the woman, right? So there are a lot of ways to do that. You could look at Bartleby the Scrivener. Some issues I've seen folks work on with Bartleby the Scrivener are looking at the story through the lens of, did Bartleby have clinical depression? You would argue that point and argue maybe that there was no understanding of clinical depression at that time. So you would have to establish that he had symptoms of that. You would look at what was available for clinical depression at the time. Not much, but you would research that. See, so you could look at, did he have some other mental health issue, right? So you could have your ideas and then explore them and try to find out through research, right? It doesn't mean that you're going to necessarily find scholarly work that Bartleby had clinical depression. You might. You might find a literature online source that argues that as well. But you can have the idea, and then you can analyze the story by your research about the symptoms of clinical depression, for example, and then analyze the story looking for evidence of that, right? So you could do that. That's one idea about Bartleby. I've had people write about homelessness, looking at the lack of resources for folks that did not have a home, and he did not have a home, right? He was living in the office. So you could look at, what was life like in the 19th century if you did not have a home? How prevalent was the issue then? You can have an idea about that. You could have what about the boss, right? You could have an idea about, that he was, he didn't seem real firm in his ideas, I mean, so I've had people write about that he was codependent. That's kind of more of a pop psychology term, I think, but still, it's an issue where people are putting their other people in front of themselves and that sort of thing. So you can look into that. I might be wrong about the pop psychology. It may be a very scholarly psychological term. I don't know. I'm not a psychology major. You get to find that out by your research, right? So that's some ideas of Bartleby. You can definitely look at through the lens of capitalism. Was Melville trying to make some point about capitalism with this story? I've had students argue that quite effectively. That reminds me, on any of these, you can have an idea that there's a connection between the author's life and the story. And again, it's an idea, not a fact, but you could research the author's life and then make a connection with the story. But if you do that, beware, beware, beware. You are not doing a report. Herman Melville was born in 18, whatever, and he was born here, he did this, he did this, and, then he did this, he wrote this, and he died. No, that's a report. No. You need to have an idea like that, let's say, I'm going to go back to Charlotte Perkins Gilman, that the story, The Yellow Wallpaper, shows the tragic effects. The story illustrates the tragic effects of the rest cure on Charlotte Perkins Gilman's own life, because she certainly did go through the rest cure, and maybe there's evidence of that in the story, right? That's what I mean by like a connection with the author's life, right? Your idea about it, evidence from research, evidence from the story. So then we have the Poe stories, right? So we have ideas that you could work on with that. The Cask of Amontillado, I've had students work on the fact that, for example, the character Fortunato was a reflection of the alcoholism that Edgar Allan Poe struggled with. That was fascinating, right? So you could research that idea. Let's see. The fall of the House of Usher, some ideas researching this twin connection, some idea that you may have about that, researching the idea of the house being a character, this personification, and how that impacted the story. The Alice Walker story, everyday use, doing a character analysis on like Dee, or a character analysis on Maggie or the mother. Or like, what about the idea of the quilts? I mean, you could talk about the importance of quilts in family history in connection with the story, or the connection of quilts in traditional African American artistry in connection with the story, right? There's so many different ways to do this, right? But some idea that you have is what you're going to be researching. All right, so now that we have just a little more of a maybe understanding on that, so, and here's where I'm doing this for both my Napa and Solano students. If you are at Solano Community College, you are taking the class LR10, right? You are going to follow the professor's instructions for LR10. He is giving you that instruction, and you are going to follow it to the letter. Then you turn it into LR10. You get credit for it there. It's your final project there. You turn it into me, and it's your next to final project. Okay, so my Napa folks, you don't have LR10. That makes no sense, right? But just ignore that part. But for both classes, this counts as a paper. The annotated bibliography counts as a paper. Why? Why, you might ask? Why does it count as a paper? Okay, because I want you to be set up for success for the final paper. If you don't have good sources, here's the human thing that happens to us sometimes, is that we all mean well and we get overwhelmed, right? And then all of a sudden the paper sneaks up on you and it's due and it's the night before and you're like, forgot about those sources. What am I going to do? And then you're in a panic. Right? I do not want you to do that. And then you get to where you're just slapping stuff together, right? Don't slap stuff together. It reads like you slapped it together, right? There's another issue that can come up with that I'll talk about in a minute. But you need to have good sources. And if you have good sources that you have clearly looked at and studied enough to know that they're going to work for you, you are likely to have a good paper. Okay, if that's not true, then you're in a panic mode, right? And I really want you to avoid that so you can be very successful. The other thing that sometimes we do is that we look at the title and you're like, yellow wallpaper. Yeah, I'm writing on yellow wallpaper. That'll work for me. Then you get it, when you actually read it, it has nothing to do with your issue. It's some other issue about the yellow wallpaper. You're like, oh, right. This having a good annotated bibliography will help you to avoid having that panic, and it will set you up for success. And the annotated bibliography, to a certain extent, is a little bit mechanical. So if you kind of feel like essay writing isn't your favorite activity, you might do very well with this. So just know that. If essay writing is your favorite activity, you'll still do well with this because it's still English. All right. So just some criteria. The annotated bibliography has to be about that. Your sources have to do something with the story or the author or your idea. Okay, so if I read your annotated bibliography and it's all on whales, I love whales, I really do. But what have whales got to do with any of these stories? Unless you're going to make some kind of a connection, a whale of a connection, I don't think that's going to work for you, and that's not going to get you a good grade. So it needs to be on the story or the author or your idea. So if it's on the yellow wallpaper, if it's on Charlotte Perkins Gilman, it's on postpartum depression, if it's on whatever is your idea, or there needs to be a connection here, right? You're going to be explaining it in your annotated bibliography. But if you're just writing about whales, that's not going to get you very far, okay? All right, so I love whales, by the way. You can write on whales in another class, I hope. All right, so you must have a minimum of 3 to 5 sources, because you have to have a minimum of 3. Well, you have to have 3 to 5 sources because you need 3 to 5 sources to write the paper. You can discuss the story in the bibliography, but it does not count as a source. Okay, so outside sources. The source is the original source. You don't have to include it if you want to, because sometimes people do. It just keeps them on track. That's fine, but you don't have to. But you need 3 sources other than the story. Okay. So, got that. All right. So, in general, you need approximately at least 1 paragraph for each of these issues I'm going to mention per source. So, in a nutshell, you have your source, right? You list that source MLA style. Then you have a paragraph going over the first point. You have another paragraph going over the second point. You have another paragraph going over the third point. So this is why it's like a paper, because it's going to be a minimum of 3 pages on this. It will take you that long if you're doing it correctly. Again, if you're at Solano, you follow the LR10 instructions. They're a little more specific, but it's the same idea. All right. So what is the first thing you need to cover? These follow the order that they're on for the prompt. So my Napa folks, I have a prompt that I will post for you. My Solano folks, it's LR10, the professor for that, all right? But how did you locate the source? So that means you should be ideally using the databases for either Napa Valley College or Solano College, whichever one you are a student at, okay? So how did you locate the source? You're going to spend a paragraph talking about how you went onto the databases and how you searched for the source and what, I found this at Literature Online, or I found this at a JSTOR or whatever, right? You will describe how you found it, how you happened upon this article. You're describing how you found the source. Why is that important? Because that is ensuring that you are getting good sources. You could use like Google Scholar, can help you to get some decent sources. Be careful with just Googling things. You should be using college academic sources only. So no Study Help 123, no procon.org, no Teen Inc., no, things like that they're just very general sources for a general audience, okay? What is that, Reddit? Like, no, right? So, or, somebody's high school paper on it. No. You need college academic sources, okay? So, databases are really the way to go with this. You can occasionally get something through Google that is a good source, but really be careful because it can often lead you astray. So Google Scholar can often be okay, but again, you just have to really evaluate. If you have a question about your source, do ask me. I contact me and ask me. I'm good with the text. So ask me and let me know, and I'll tell you, because sometimes you can find something in a general source that is an academic, article that would be perfect for you. So, for example, I once read in O Magazine has gone away. Oh my gosh, I love O Magazine, and I'm very sad about that. But at any rate, I once read a really wonderful article when I was working on my master's degree about an idea I was writing about the book Little Women by Louisa May Alcott, and there was an article in O Magazine written by an Alcott scholar talking about how Little Women is still has never gone out of print and the significance of the book. So it was a popular general source that anybody could access from their grocery store or whatever, right? So I asked my professor if I could use that source, and she said because it was by an Alcott scholar that was actually perfectly acceptable. So there can be crossovers there. So do ask if you're not sure. But basically, databases are your best friend with this. Okay, and then how you locate the source. A summary of the source. So you are going to summarize the source. So this article is about whatever it's about, right? So that ensures that you looked over the source. You know what it's about, right? You're going to talk about the author, about their credentials. They've been studying this, writing this. Like I said when that article I had, that they were like an Alcott scholar, right? So you're going to talk about the source, the article, who wrote it, why it's effective, what it's about. All right. So that's at least one paragraph. Then you have at least one paragraph on how this source will help you with your paper. How will this source help with you with your idea, for example, that it was tragic that the narrator in the yellow wallpaper went through what we would now term postpartum depression with absolutely no resources, right? And no help whatsoever, right? Maybe you could talk about, in this article, they talk about how there was no understanding of postpartum depression during the 19th century, and women really were given what was called the rest cure and fine, right? So that's going to really help me develop my ideas about what the rest cure was about and the terrible effect that it had on women or something at that time, right? So basically, one paragraph each. So you've got source number one. You've got how did you find the source, right? You've got a summary of the source, right? And you've got why this will help in your paper, right? One paragraph for each of those, okay? So that's kind of it in a nutshell. That I just wanted to give you this overview. What is the annotated bibliography? You can look online, like they have on YouTube, like some decent videos about, annotated bibliographies and things like that. But just trying to think, is there one in the textbook? I'm not sure. All the time I'm not sure. I have to think about that. But at any rate, I'll look that up. But that gives you that overview. And again, I count it as a paper. I like to say that this is an easy A. Why do I say that? Because if you follow the directions and you just have your sources, you have college academic sources, you have a clear idea, and you explain, you have paragraphs, at least 3 paragraphs for each source explaining these criteria, it's cited correctly, MLA style, you are just marching right through there to success, right? However, if you forget to do it, or you're like, don't have time, which is, we're all overwhelmed. So, no judgment. It's just that there's no judgment, but there's a 0. And that's going to wreak havoc with your grades. So don't do that, right? So it's, I think it's fairly straightforward if you just do it, right? And you do it right. But if you're, if you do it slapdash, this is my word for today. I've been using this word today. If you do it really slapdash, like you're just like, yeah, it's a source, say a couple words here, a couple words there, and I'm done, right? She said it was an easy A. No, that's not an A, right? That's an easy, I don't know what it is. It depends on whether you do it. So you don't want to take what I said and meaning put that you don't need to put anything into it. Or if you start writing about whales, that's an easy F, seriously. So don't do that, right? Take it seriously, but it's sort of mechanical in that you don't have to have a thesis statement or topic sentences here, right? So if you're like, oh, yes, she said I don't have to have a thesis, woohoo, I'm loving this already. All right, fine, right? So you're, whatever your thoughts are on thesis statements. But so I'm hoping that gives you a little bit more of an overview and that you're comfortable with it. All right, thank you.